So, hello everyone. Welcome into our space that we're sharing today. I'm really delighted to have everyone here and joining us. I'm just going to take a moment to find a few of my notes that I have ready. I wanted to welcome everybody into this virtual space and just take a moment to acknowledge that for our hosts today, the Reach Gallery Museum and the University of the Fraser Valley are located on Soch Tamok, the unceded Stalo territory of the Sumath and Masqui First Nations. Sara Kahn is joining us from the unceded traditional lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish Coast Salish nations. And as we enter into a season when many of us are going to be enjoying time and space outside, I wanted to encourage us all to do the good work of learning more about the original land keepers of the places that we all call home. I have the honor today of introducing Sara Kahn to you if you have not had the chance to meet Sara, and to also introduce you to Adrienne Fast. The conversation today is going to be held between Adrienne and Sara. Just to give you a brief introduction to Sara's biography, Sara Kahn was born in Birmingham, England in 1984 and raised in Lahore, Pakistan. She holds a BFA with honors from the National College of Arts in Lahore in 2008, and she was one of 13 international artists selected for a BAG Art Camp, an international art residency in Bergen, Norway. She was also one of 23 artists selected for the Vancouver Mural Festival in 2018. Her works have been featured in several national and international group exhibitions. In addition, her first solo show, I'm going to get that wrong, Suraj Kinar. Please let me know, Sara, if
that's perfect. Suraj Kinare.
Suraj Kinare in Canada at the Surrey Art Gallery in 2019. Recent group shows include Terrestrial Beings, Esplanade Arts and Heritage Center in Medicine Hat in 2019, and What is Seen and Not Seen with or Without Seeing at the Gandhara Art Space in Karachi, Pakistan in 2017. Her work has also been featured in the book A Big Important Artist, A Womanual by Danielle Krissa. She lives and works in Vancouver, Canada. So welcome to the space. I'm so delighted to have you here. I am going to turn off my camera and let Adrienne and Sara continue with their great conversation.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
And thank you to the University of Fraser Valley, the School of Creative Arts, for organizing this event and co-hosting it with us here at the Reach. My name is Adrienne Fast. I'm the curator of art and visual culture at the Reach Gallery Museum. And I have the great pleasure of sitting down and chatting with my friend Sara Kahn today. Hi, Sara.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Adrienne.
It's a pleasure. It's always nice chatting with you. And it's nice to also chat about your work, because I get to do that with our visitors pretty much every day that we're open now, and I get to do it for the next 4 months. So it's
amazing.
Fantastic.
I hope you're having fun.
I am having fun. I had a school tour yesterday with some high school kids. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, because I think it relates to some questions about storytelling that I want to ask. But the first question I want to ask you is really about your choice of medium. So all the paintings that are in the exhibition, and I believe most of the work that you do in painting is in watercolor, which is a notoriously difficult medium. It's unforgiving. It's impossible to make corrections once it's made, and it sort of sometimes has a life of its own. I was wondering if you could talk, first of all, just a little bit about what it is that attracts you to watercolor, why you like working in watercolor, and maybe a little bit about some of the challenges that it presents.
Yeah, for me, that's exactly the stuff that you said. That is what draws me to it. I love the fluidity. It's sort of, you can't conquer it with force. It has to be sort of nudged here and there to sort of make it work for you. It needs a gentle touch. And I love that about watercolor. I feel like it's a great medium for sort of having like a dialogue on the paper. You sort of push it somewhere, it goes somewhere by itself, and then you sort of, there's like a push and pull, and I feel that works really well to have like a conversation with the work. So definitely one of my favorite things about it is that I feel like most things grow really well that way. If you have like a gentler touch or a nudge towards things and let it sort of speak to you. I feel like even with like my toddler, I look at her, I feel like a gentler touch works better than, plants, little humans. I feel like everything, I don't know if sheer force and that kind of stuff. I maybe that works for certain personalities and my personality isn't that way. And then the problems are similar to what you said as well, where once you've put the paint down, you can't dab it off to bring that negative space. So there's that, but then there's also scale. It's very hard to go big on watercolor on paper. Paper warping is another big hassle. I think paper warping doesn't bother some people. It drives me a little crazy because I feel like, okay, now, because obviously it's going to puddle then, and that's a little too far when it comes to it doing its own thing.
How long have you been working in watercolor? How many years? Because the way that you're able to, it looks like you're able to control it and make it do what you want. I understand from your conversation, you're saying it's more of a dialogue, and maybe the paint has some of its own agency in that equation as well. But you seem to be able to create such delicate and intricate patterns. How many years have you been working in watercolor to be able to master it so well?
I guess it's the understanding of it, right? You understand the medium so well, so you know when to add water and when to reduce it, or when to add more pigment or paint. I actually took to it very quickly in school.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in grade 8, maybe, or 9, when they made us do watercolor and art O levels and A levels. And I immediately took to it. I really enjoyed it. My teacher would give us, paintings to copy or photos to copy. And I was really able to manage that I feel like quite easily. I just enjoyed it. And then as time passed, I went to college, I started doing oils and stuff, which was a more serious medium. But when I came back to ink and watercolor, I realized, I think I was just trying it here in Vancouver in the past maybe 5-6 years. I had like a little old travel set I think I brought from Pakistan, and I thought, okay, why not? Let me try this. Because I went back to ink, but I didn't go back completely to watercolor, thinking it's used for sketches and preparatory work. It's not serious. But I went back to it and I realized I love it. So although I started back when I was maybe 13 or 14,
you went away from it for a while.
I went away from it a little while.
It's so interesting that you like those hierarchies of media that are really like tied to old European royal academies and painting salons, and the idea that not only the medium but also the genre, there's these hierarchies where
100%.
only like when you get to the very top that you do history painting in oil.
Yes.
Exactly. Interestingly, maybe about more than 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I worked for the Royal Watercolor Society in London, England. And this whole society was founded because they weren't allowed to show watercolors at the Royal Academy exhibition because it was considered, as you exactly say, it's like they're called watercolor sketches and drawings.
Sketches and drawings.
Yeah, they're not paintings, they're drawings.
No, they're drawings.
Yeah. So some of the artists who were championing the medium and seeing its real expressive value in its own sake then split off and made the Royal Watercolor Society. But there's still this like hangover of these categories from hundreds of years ago that were decided by white dudes that has determined that these are more valuable than others. And the other, because I've collected a number of watercolors from my time then, the other thing that I think maybe sometimes causes watercolor to have a lesser appreciation is because it fades. You can buy an oil painting and it'll look like that oil painting for the next however 100 years.
Yes.
But watercolor is more alive. It's if you put it in a space that has a lot of light, it will fade. You have to be a little bit more precious with it if you want to preserve it.
If you want to preserve it. And I think that's another thing I really love about it. You have to be precious with it. And yes, things fade and we all die. And that's just also a part. I don't know why we really hold on to things and want them to survive forever and ever and ever. And that's also something that sort of irritates me a little, about how we think in general. Also I feel like the way technology is going, I don't know if it'll matter anymore as well. This
Because
wanting
there will
to
still be
hold
like
on.
the digital images of the
Digital
work.
images, exactly. Digital images.
So
I don't
these
know how.
new, what are they called? NFTs or whatever they
NFTs. I'm
are?
always talking to my husband and going, FTNs, what are they? And he's like, that's what it is. But I mean, that's also a route I'm not really intrigued by. I mean, that's me though. Technology just frightens me a little. I'm not very tech savvy. It's intriguing for sure. It's a different life for the work, but I feel like the general needing to hold on to things forever and ever and ever when you don't know, especially once you're dead, what's going to happen.
So you mentioned that you studied when you went to university to study art, you worked in oils. What did you think about working in oils? Did you like it or did it seem very strange?
I loved it. I loved oil as well. I found it easy to grasp and learn and understand it and how it's used. And I still sometimes do get I don't. I think most mediums I really enjoy. I've been playing with the tablet and pen as well. It's not my immediate desire to go there, but I do tend to enjoy them. Oil paints are beautiful and wonderful to use, but I find them a bit um, heavy. I find oils in general heavy, and then there's all the labor that goes with it, like the cleaning and the brushes and the paints, everything, and then the mediums you have to use, the terps and stuff. Everything
Yes.
smells very
Yes.
strong, so you need a space for it. Right now, I'm not in a place where I can have a studio that's outside my home.
Yes, it does come with a lot of very toxic chemicals and toxic smells, which are not really conducive to a home studio environment.
A home studio, exactly. A carpeted home studio with a little toddler running around. I think maybe, yeah, I do see them in the future for me just because I like playing around with different mediums. But this works really well for me at the moment. So I'm getting to explore them more and more, which I like.
Well, as I say, it really, you look like an absolute master of watercolor, and it is really impressive. Now, you mentioned that you studied oil when you were in school and university, but I know you also did your minor in printmaking.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me listening to you talk about the way you talk about watercolor as, you want it to go a certain way. It answers back and says, no, I'm going to go this way. And then it's like a conversation back and forth between yourself and the medium. And then the end result is it's not necessarily what you thought was going to be the end result when you started, because things change and decisions get made by both you and the medium along the way. And I really think that printmaking is very much like that. I think of printmakers often as people who they're like directors of a movie set. They like set a series of events in motion. And then the actual, like, the thing happens and unexpected things happen, and then you check the results, and I always like when you pull the first print off of the press as a printmaker, you're always like, oh, I wonder what it's going to look like. It's always a surprise.
It's always a surprise.
So I wonder if I wonder if you see that similarity between when you were doing printmaking work and the way that you sort of have a dialogue with watercolor. But also the related question is the way that you use negative space in your paintings, where you become aware of a shape, you see a shape because it is the raw white paper that has been left untouched. So you recognize something by the shape of its absence. And I also see that printmakers have a very keen sort of eye and mind for negative and positive space. Yeah. Do you feel like that your watercolor work and your printmaking work have kind of combined in those ways?
For sure, because the thing is, I loved printmaking back in college as well. That's another thing I also wanted to do. So I did it as a minor. I love the even the lab feel of a printmaking studio, where you're just like experimenting with all these different plates and everything. There's the whole process is so exciting because you just never know how it's going to end up in the end. And I love that element of surprise. I think that's what I like about watercolor as well, where it sort of goes where it wants to. With printmaking, I also love the way, how it feels like it stands in planes. Like there's, the top layer, and you can literally just see them. And I love that, the way they create space. And I love, yes, how you have to sort of have like an eye for where the space will never be touched. The paper will never be, or the surface will never be touched in certain areas to give you that negative space. So printmaking for sure, I think, has influenced the way I sort of create my layers, especially. And then also I used to love Japanese prints when I was initially back in college, when you're initially studying art and stuff. To be honest, I get this feeling my mom had some prints when we were little in the bedroom, and I just would look at them and think, these kind of moments, I think they sort of take root, or the first time you see something and you really really love it. So Japanese prints also, I love the way they come together, the atmosphere they create. And then also I love, when it comes to negative spaces especially, I love the idea of things that are supposed to be there in theory, or they're there, but you can't touch them, like the horizon, or light streaming into a room. You can't touch it, it's there. It holds a space somehow. So I love that as well. I love these things that exist but don't. Or when it comes to specifically perhaps my negative spaces in my paintings, it's has this person or this particular negative space, is it somebody there, or is it somebody's influence that has been left behind? Is it somebody's footprint that's been left behind? So I think I like playing with that whole idea of what is actually there and what is only there in your memory or imagination, fact versus fiction,
Well, and I see that running through both like materially or aesthetically, in terms of the way you use negative and positive space, but then also sort of metaphorically and in terms of your subject matter, where you're often either talking about or addressing your work to friends and family back in Pakistan, in Lahore, who you're separated from, but you're still obviously very emotionally linked.
Yes.
And I love how in your paintings, it's like the idea of presence and absence are not opposites. It's not either or, it's both and. So that always presence and absence are things that exist in the same place at the same time. It runs through all kinds of sorts of layers and ways of thinking about your work. So I'm glad I got that right.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel like if one is there, then the other exists, sort of.
And we'll come back to this when we talk about your installation piece. Okay.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing. Yes, we'll come back to it.
Yeah, but it's so the next question I want to ask is in addition to being like immediately viscerally beautiful, and I think people can appreciate your work on that level for sure. But there's also often when you look closer, there's some like creepy little details that you really need to like spend time close up with the work. It's like from a distance, you're sort of overwhelmed by color and pattern, and it sucks you in, and then you get there and you're like, oh, I didn't expect to find that. How I was talking to a school group yesterday that I was touring, and I was talking to them about like their little Easter eggs, like you would find in video games. They're like little clues that there's something else going on here as well. How important is that to you to have a kind of an underlying creepy factor in these paintings that are could be so easily appreciated simply as being really beautiful?
Pretty pictures, like old school watercolor paintings of bouquets of flowers, and So I think I take it for granted a little bit. I have recently become more aware of what I am drawn towards, the kind of colors and aesthetics or even narratives that I'm drawn to, and embracing them and owning them. Because in college, it was more about morbid and grotesque and go towards the dark side. I don't know if it was specifically my teacher or it was a trend at that time, because a lot of the times, whatever's happening in the outside world, art world, it sort of seeps in, whatever is, popular. But recently I've become more certain about my visuals, that it's, I've sort of accepted them, embraced them. But I've been thinking about, specifically thinking a lot about why that also for me, both of them have to be there for it to make sense. And I've been thinking about where it comes from. I think there's always these really clear memories or moments in your life where something made a big impact. And I think magic realism was one of them. I remember reading 100 Years of Solitude around college time or earlier, by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I loved how everything would be so normal and ordinary, but there'd be something really weird and absurd in there. And it sort of opened my eyes to a new way of storytelling. This is how you can tell a story as well, where everything's normal, but there's something very absurd happening in one corner, or some person is completely normal and they have some weird aspect to them. And then I started thinking about more recently why I even see the world like that. And I think, when you're having discussions with friends, or you're listening in on a discussion, and somebody will say something like, the world's become a terrible place. And I find that a really strange statement, because I think even if you don't know a little bit of history or historical fiction or even biblical stories or Quranic verses, you know that the world has always been a really terrible place. But there is a possibility of making it a better place, or like that. There's the evil, but then there's also the good. Sure. And I think that's how since I became more aware of history or all of that, I've always had this thing at the back of my head when somebody says that, I'm like, no, there's like many stories telling us that it's always been like that, but then there's also a lot of beauty. You have to see that is really beautiful, but and wonderful, but then there's also a lot of like very dangerous things happening.
In a way, it's human nature, is that like every human being, as a human being, we're capable of like the most heinous, horrific acts of hatred and violence, depending on our environment and our conditioning. Any human being could be capable of doing horrible things. And at the same time, every human being is also capable of sublime acts of kindness and generosity. And you can't really, if you can't wrap your head around the fact, then you're going to go around thinking that there's good people and bad people, as opposed to there's just people. People who've had, been influenced in different ways, but every one of us is capable of any of those things.
Exactly. I mean, something basic like you walk down to your grocery and smile at an old lady and it makes her day better. It's something very simple, but there is that possibility of it, not being just a terrible place. So I don't know. I feel like that also goes hand in hand. It can't exist without the others, sort of, in a very basic level.
And in this sort of grand, like macro sense, I understand what you're saying about how the world contains both of these forces. And so it's important to have both, the aesthetic beauty, but also these sort of creepy or disturbing details. There's something also, because your color palette could be read particularly as feminine.
Yes.
And I think I accentuated that in the exhibition by choosing pink and gold for the title wall.
Yes, I love it.
It looks
I
beautiful.
love it. It made
It's
my
also
day.
very spring-like and feminine.
Yes.
And so sometimes in some of your works, I see there being sort of a comment on gender and gender expectations for women, especially, that you're presented with these beautiful floral patterns and pinks and soft reds, and the expectation for women to be aesthetically pleasing and to always be smiling and to always be agreeable. But again, when you get a little bit closer, there's these little details that remind you that there's also, in every human being, every woman, there is also perhaps a monstrous side. There's also like an element of that we're not, that it's more complex than simply straightforward, like one-dimensional aesthetic beauty.
Yes, sneakily hide the creep.
Yeah.
Sneakily hide the creep, and then it can pounce on you whenever you want.
And especially because, like, not only with your color, like it is your color palette, and perhaps like the prominence of florals and floral patterns, but also in your work, I mentioned that you're often addressing your work or your painting about your family in Pakistan, but often it's explicitly in the relationship between mothers and daughters. And that comes up in your titles, it comes up in the images that you represent. So again, an emphasis perhaps on female characters, which can be troubled by some of these disturbing details. But I was wondering if this interest in and this focus on the relationship between mothers and daughters is something that you've been interested in for a long time, or is it really something that has become more accentuated since you yourself had a daughter?
So I've always been, I think, drawn to, I've always been very close to my mother. So I think there's always been an empathy. Her bringing us up, I've always felt an empathy towards her. It must have been a difficult thing to do, and I'm realizing now, yes, it is a difficult thing to do, but because of that, I think I've always looked at mothers. I've been in awe of mothers. I'm also very close to my mother. I've always looked up to her. So I think there's always been some aspects of motherhood in my work from the very beginning, through an observer's perspective, or through by looking at my friends. But then it became, it increased when I started thinking about having kids myself, because it sort of, you start observing your friends more carefully and wondering if you'll be able to manage and stuff. And then definitely a much larger focus since I actually had Marzia, my baby, because, you know, it's really crazy when you look at your parents through a magnifying glass to understand yourself. It goes a long, long way, I feel, because they sort of made you. And then when you have a child, it's really strange. It just sort of, the perspective widens, and everything sort of doubles, because suddenly you're in their shoes. Right. So you see it more. So I think, especially the first year, whenever you it's like test after test, and you're barely able to manage, no sleep, and then you have to take care of. It's very tiny, very fragile, and you really it makes you think about how insane the whole situation is. So I think a lot of the work, a lot of the recent work has a lot more of that in it, motherhood.
Yeah. It seems almost inevitable, and yet we're still in a place where new fathers who are artists rarely get talked about how fatherhood has impacted their practice. It's a question that gets asked of women artists a lot, but
not so much. Yes, and I think it should be. It's such an interesting. It changes you in such an amazing, incredible way. And I'm not saying it's for everybody at all. I always say I'm a lazy learner, so I think it was really good for me. But it's definitely something that should be spoken about in a more open way, instead of instead of these very cushy, cutesy, Madonna-like images, or light falling on you and you're holding a baby. It's all like
Everything's perfect.
Everything's perfect, and it's so peaceful and glowy.
Well, and I think that's part of why I think your work probably resonates with a lot of new mothers or new parents as well, is that it does, again, it is beautiful. It is but it also is very challenging. And it's also like there are these kind of unpleasant little details that you can find in the work as well. That it's not only I think about the challenge, like the challenges of making the work itself, not equating it to parenthood, but just if people know watercolor and they see your work, they must realize like it takes so much work to make it look effortless,
Yes. Oh my God, I love that comparison, Adrienne. I love it. Yes. It's very hard to make it look effortless.
Yeah.
But I love that the when you describe my work, I think of flowers, and then they have this you'll see a beautiful photo of pink blossoming flowers, and then you'll see like a worm or a caterpillar on it. It's really creepy looking, or maggots on something really fleshy. That's what I
That's what you like.
That's what I love. Visually, that's what I love. And I feel like that's what it sort of sums up, I don't know, everything.
I think we should put that in your artist statement from now on, like PS and maggots on stuff.
Exactly.
Perfect. Okay, well, that sort of actually brings me to my next question, which is about narrative and storytelling, because there's so many details in your work and there's so many layers, and you like even like every time I go down like and look at it, it feels like I'm seeing something new. I'm catching some detail that I didn't see the first time or the fourth time or the 10th time, and it can be so interesting for viewers, I think, to weave to imagine all of these narratives, all of these stories that could emerge from your images. So for example, I had this tour yesterday with these high school kids, and we were looking specifically at your performance on the terrace pieces. So there's a very large piece with the two audience members, and then there's the bull-headed figure and the crocodile figure. And so I was just asking them questions, drawing out like what is this? Like what are they doing? And they said, okay, well, the bull-headed guy is dancing because he's quite in a sort of a dancing pose. I'm like, okay, so he's dancing. So what about the crocodile? What's the crocodile doing? And it's like, well, he's got his mouth open, so maybe he's singing while the bull is dancing. I'm like, okay, cool. And then at the very top of the pictures, you see there's that slight, very subtle architectural detail, which I believe is actually like the balustrade on a terrace. And I said, what do you think this is? And they said, maybe it's a bridge. And I'm like, okay, so they're singing and dancing on a bridge. Okay. And then what about these two figures? What are they doing? And they're like, oh, they're watching. They're the audience. Okay. And one of the figures is quite contorted, as you know. So I said, well, why is this figure like bent over? It's like, oh, well, that figure is doing yoga because they have a bad back. And I was like, and so we spent all this time, and it was like just like pulling out details from them to like, okay, just weaving a story of what's happening in these pictures. And then I charged them to then go off to different pictures and write a little short story based on whatever they think is happening. And it's just like for every picture, you could probably write like 100 different possible stories about what maybe is happening in them. And I'm wondering, like, do you have a story in your mind that you're thinking of when you're painting, or are you quite happy for people to take these stories in all kinds of random directions in whatever way they might think? How do you relate narrative and storytelling to your work?
So for me, what you just said is the most important thing. I love that about painting, that you put it out there and everybody brings their own personal history or their own personal stories to it and take what they want. It changes. Once you put it out there, it takes a form of its own. And I love that. That's definitely one of the things I love the most about painting. When I'm always thinking of things and stories and observations and things I'm obsessing over. I use those things to begin my painting, to think of the composition, to think of the colors. Everything starts from there. And definitely these have stories. I think past giving birth, I was thinking, or sort of reevaluating my relationships. I was thinking about what worked, what didn't work, because I think suddenly your time becomes really short after you get so busy with the taking care that you start thinking of, how much time do I have to spend with who. And as I was reevaluating them, I was thinking about what brought me most joy, and that was when my friends and I would sit together, or close people like my mother and sister, whoever, would sit together and laugh and be silly and be whoever we wanted. And there's such an element of performance there, with this one person standing there dancing or singing, and it doesn't matter what kind of weirdness is being brought to the table, and I was thinking about that. I think that's where these particular images started. And terrace, because at least in Pakistan, I feel like we do that a lot. In Lahore, not Pakistan, but in Lahore specifically, times are spent on terraces a lot, especially in good weather. So I have lots of memories of all of us sitting either on a terrace or outside somewhere where everybody's together and laughing and having fun. And there is, there's definitely what highlighted more in my head about those times was the joy and the fun. The creep factor is always there, but mostly
the crocodile with the 6 eyes, and
because we're all a little, like, I mean, at least the people I surround myself with are all a bit nutty and crazy. So, the idea that you have the space where you can be whoever was what was coming to my mind.
So the last question that I want to talk to you about, and then we'll perhaps take questions, is I want to talk about this shift in the exhibition from the paintings that are in our event space to the fabric installation, which is in the atrium. And I was thinking about what you were saying earlier on about the way that the difficulties of scale with watercolor and how the paper becomes more warped the larger you get. Because we have, in the painting section of the exhibition, we have some very small works, which just got added recently. And then we have some medium-sized works, and then the large paper works, which are pinned to the wall that aren't framed. And it's so interesting to me that at the smaller scale, it feels like the paper disappears. The paper is, you don't notice it. All you're looking at is the paint. And then as you go up in scale to the medium works, and then especially to the larger works, the paper itself, the surface, starts to play a role. It's as much a character in the composition as the figures that you've painted. Again, that might bother some people, but some people, to me, it feels like it's becoming three-dimensional. It's becoming like a three-dimensional piece rather than like a two-dimensional painting on a support. And then in the way that the white negative space, the absence, if you will, becomes present because of how much you become aware of it, then you go into the atrium and suddenly all we have is the support, the invisible support, and all of the color has been evacuated. And what we have is, I think about those pieces, first of all, as like friendly ghosts that you can see from the outside of the building that kind of lure you in. But also, to me, there's still the pattern there because there's the layering, but it's almost like you've taken that attention that you've drawn to the paper, to the white paper and the large paintings, and made that the focus, and like now you're only looking at the negative space.
Yes.
So
taken all the negative space and sort of like jigsaw puzzled it in the atrium.
So what was your, like, this is, I think, like one of your first sort of experiments with installation and with fabric. So what was the inspiration for that? What drew you to want to explore that different medium? Is it just because you're endlessly curious with media?
Definitely very curious with medium, but also the scale. As I was going bigger, I was feeling like, okay, how do I do this without paper being a difficult thing, for becoming a burden for me. So first, the scale that we mentioned earlier, and then also I love the idea, like what we spoke about, the negative space sort of becomes it's all negative space. So it's all, what is it even there? Is it not? But then there's also the painting thing that we were talking about, how everybody brings their own history and personal narratives to paintings and takes what they want from it. Like once you put it out there, it takes a life of its own. With this, I got to push it a little further. The format's the same, but the layers are put in such a way that wherever you're standing, the narrative changes.
Right.
So whatever your, I love that it changes your perspective, the position, wherever you're standing, everything depends on where you're looking from. Right. And I love that idea in itself. Like wherever you're looking at things from, everything's going to be different. So with these, how the layers are, when you move around them, the narrative changes as
and
well.
It changes during the course of the day, as you've seen with the way the light comes through the windows. It changes with the shadows. Exactly. They take on different, like you can see different parts of
it. Yes. When I've seen like the back panel sort of is difficult to see last time I came. So it was just the 3 panels that were doing things, and then so that, and then it was strange because I was getting frustrated with work on paper that I was doing at that time, and then I started working on tissue. So it was a process trying to figure out what would work. Initially, I was still, because I love paper so much, I was still working with paper, and then I went on to fabric. But when you invited me to do the show, I was like, oh my God, I have space. Yeah. And I can do anything I want. So that's what happened. So thank you for that. I don't think it would have happened otherwise.
Well, and in as much as, I think about printmakers as people who sort of are directors who set a series of events in motion, and then you make a myriad decisions along the way, or things change, and then you end up with something you couldn't have imagined at the end. Yeah. Curating is kind of the same thing.
It is like a director, like you said in the beginning, like a film director.
Well, and it's always like I've done exhibitions where like you have a very set of instructions or plans at the beginning, and then you just execute those plans, and you end up at the end with exactly what you thought you were going to have at the beginning, and it's fine, but it's not nearly as much fun as the kind of experiments that get to happen, like when you're working with artists who are actually present with you in the space, and we can try this and try that and see how it works. And then and it's always, then I get to be surprised at the end too. It's like pulling that first print off the printing press. You're like, I wonder what it's going to be.
With the fabric installation, it was exactly that. I had no idea what it'd be like in the end, because no matter how the biggest window I could find in our apartment, it wasn't big enough for the first panel. So I really couldn't see, I could only see portions of it. So it was a really interesting experience.
I think we both extend our thanks and gratitude to Kate Bradford, assistant curator.
Yes, she's the best. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, she brought her expertise. So we come with all kinds of ideas, and then we ask Kate, can we do this?
Would this be possible?
How do we do this?
Kate was the one who suggested fabric to me.
Yes, yeah.
It was right under my nose, but I couldn't see it. And Kate was like, you want to try fabric?
But I find it so interesting to think about how, like with the large watercolor paintings, it's almost like you're going from 2 dimensions, you're starting to make it into 3 dimensions. Yes. And then when you go into the installation, okay, yeah, it's definitely 3-dimensional, but also because of the way it changes during the course of the day, it's also kind of working in 4 dimensions.
Yeah, so I love that. Yeah, it's really funny how I kept thinking of fabric, but I kept thinking, sometimes I get like, when you get stubborn, you don't want
You're trying to make something work.
Work with something that may not fit. Sometimes there's fun stuff that happens that comes from that as well. But I'm glad
But sometimes you have to let it go and just.
Sometimes you have to let it go and just try something, and then maybe go back to tissue, like my obsession with tissue.
Okay, so with that, I see that maybe there are some questions in the Q&A, and I just want to make sure we have some time for that. Yes. Aimée, are you able to step in and perhaps read those questions?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for such a great conversation about the work. Just wanted to say that before we dive in. So we have a question.
I can't believe we get paid to do this.
Exactly. Thank you.
I do this for free.
We have a question from Mandeep. Mandeep is asking, I get the impression, Sara, that your painting is influenced by Mughal miniature paintings. And Mandeep is asking if the tradition of Mughal miniature painting does influence your work.
So thank you for the question. So in NCA, Mughal miniature painting is a really big thing. They have a wonderful, huge department. And I love some of the Mughal paintings I've seen growing up and I see now. The only thing is when I tried doing it at NCA, it has a lot of rules and limitations in the beginning when they're trying to teach you the craft. When it comes to learning craft, I seem to have a little bit of resistance because then you can't, it's like the baking versus cooking thing. Cooking, you sort of just do whatever you want. With baking, there's very strict laws. And so with Mughal miniature painting, it was like that. Persian miniature and Mughal miniature painting, I just found it very difficult to sort of do learn the craft. So although I probably am influenced by it because it has a lot of storytelling and narratives and water-based mediums, watercolors, I can't say I know it as well as I know painting and techniques of painting, regular painting and printmaking. But definitely an influence, I'm sure.
That's great. That's something that I was thinking of as well, as like an adjacent influence. We have a question too from Megan, and this is just an invitation as well for folks. If you do have a question, we probably have time for another 1 or 2 questions, so feel free to pop that up in the chat. The question is from Megan. Do you see your future artworks continuing to be made with the medium of watercolor, or do you think you will further explore different mediums or go back to oil, and why?
I will probably always continue watercolor as well as discover and play around with other mediums. I think I usually don't, I don't think I drop mediums. If I love them, they continue, they keep coming back. So I can imagine using watercolor for life. And to be honest, if somebody said I could only use watercolor for life, I would do it. As much as I enjoy other mediums, I don't think I feel that hierarchy I don't take seriously at all. Did I answer the question? I think that was it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like the idea of that kind of like gathering of things in the tool belt.
Yes. Same.
Of there being not just feeling the restriction of like, oh, I am a painter, and so I can only work in this one way.
Exactly.
And I think that's so powerful to see in your work.
I also appreciate, I appreciate also like that sometimes we're dealing with like practical life situations, and like if you don't have access to a printmaking studio, which can often be very expensive equipment, there's certain kinds of printmaking that you just can't do if you don't have access to a professional studio, either maybe as a faculty member or as a printmaking collective or whatever. And similarly, when you're talking about the constrictions around using oil in a home-based studio, like there are, as much as we think that artists do whatever they want, they can choose, they can they can just pick random things out of the sky and make it happen. There are always I appreciate that you're finding ways to explore medium depending on what your situation is at the particular moment. And then that can change.
Exactly. Obviously. Like right now I'm doing some embroidery. I like to play around with clay sometimes. I just feel like embroidery, because I feel like if I work here in the evening while Marzia is sleeping in the next room, then I always feel like it's my fault. I moved something and she woke up. So now I'm just like, I'll just embroidery outside in the living room, So you just have to sort of, I think kids really push you to think outside the box and find new ways to making.
For sure.
We have one more question that's come in from Nimra. Nimra also wanted to say that they love your work, which is great. There's also some lovely comments in the chat, so I'll make sure that you get to see that, Sarah. Nimra wanted to ask, what's the process of creating a painting for you? Do you sketch an idea and a color scheme first, or do you just start working right onto the paper? I think that might be a nice way to just kind of come full circle.
Yes. So thank you for the questions. I usually first start thinking about what I'm really obsessing over in my head at the moment. So, or whatever experience I'm going through, I'll think about that and start making notes. So I'll even have quotes from books written down that I'm reading, whatever resonates with me. First, I need to be very clear about that. While I'm doing that, I start doing lots of drawings as well. So making notes and drawings. That helps me figure out what I'm pulled towards making, or what I'm attracted to creating a body of work about. And those sketches help me figure out larger pieces of work, larger projects. So usually a lot of drawing and sketching before right now I'm in, because I didn't want to get the post-show blues, I'm like constantly drawing and sketching to see what I want to do next, to figure out what I want to do next.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a nice way of kind of demystifying the process, because there's sort of this idea of artist as isolated, solitary genius, where the ideas just come from on high, and it's like, oh, like there's work.
Action painting, very on the head.
We might be able to squeeze in one more question, if that's okay with you, Sarah.
Oh, it's fine with me. Yeah, I enjoy questions.
Oh, this is great. This is from Anashay. Anashay's asking, I loved this, and especially the part where you talked about loving sitting with your friends in Lahore. Can you share one of these influences, like when you first saw the Japanese prints in your mom's room, that come into the way you paint now?
Yeah, this is one of the friends who I've sat. She's probably the bullhead. How do these influences come into the work directly? A lot of the times I even go back and look for things I might have seen in the past that I didn't quite know, couldn't quite place where they came from. Like I'll search on the internet and find a painting that, may have been in a house. And I keep those books and prints around me to look at. Just to sort of tap what that is doing for me. So that way for sure. And then when it comes to experiences, notes again, I'll have notes and drawings and sketches, and that's how they usually surface in the paintings, in the drawings.
Oh, that's fantastic. We are right on time. And just to be aware that we have to pass over the webinar platform, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Sarah, and so much, Adrienne, for your rich conversation, for sharing this with us today. Folks, as we exit, we've got a little thank you screen that acknowledges, but I just wanted to say, even though we couldn't get to all of the questions that popped up between the Q&A and the chat, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody for carving out time in their day to spend with us as well. It's an honor and a privilege.
And I'll do one plug and just say the exhibition is open until September the 4th. So come and see it in Abbotsford. We're open Tuesdays to Saturdays. Admission is always by donation.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. We're so happy to have you here today. We hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank
Take
you
care,
so
everyone.
much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.